वेलकम टू वी लर्न में आपका स्वागत है। We are covering marketing research, session 7, attitude, measurement and scaling. Topics covered are attitude, level of measurements, format of rating scales, single item versus multiple item scales, criteria for good measurement. When we talk about marketing research, it generally deals with the behavior of the consumer. Now it therefore becomes very essential for an organization who is conducting a marketing research to understand and measure the attitude of its consumer towards its products and services. Because if the consumer they have an unfavorable attitude or they have a poor image about the company, it would be difficult to sustain themselves for a long time. Now when we talk about attitude is basically a degree of the positive or negative effect which is associated with the object. A person may have a positive attitude towards a product, towards an object, towards a brand, towards a company, and they likewise could have a negative effect also. It is also defined as a predisposition of the individual to evaluate some objects or symbols of his words in a favorable or unfavorable manner. So there are two dimensions of attitude. One is favorable, another is unfavorable. One is positive, another is negative. So two extremes they follow. Now they comprises basically of three components. One is a cognitive component. When we talk about cognitive component, it is basically a person's belief or information about the object. When we talk about the affective component, it is about the feeling of a person about a particular product or an object. And the last is the behavioral component. So when we talk about behavioral component, it is the person's ability to respond behaviorally to that object. Now the study and the measurement of attitude is a very important issue because it helps in establishing a relationship between the attitude and the behavior. Researchers, they have to indicate that such a relationship it holds more at aggregate level and lesser at the individual level. Now attitude could be one of the factors that influence a behavior. There could be other factors other than attitude which may have more powerful influence on behavior. Now when we talk about level of measurements, now measurement basically means assigning numbers to the objects to represent the quantities of their attributes. So the assignment of numbers is done according to some standards and some rules. Now the attributes could be the income, the preference, the religion, the class. Similarly, they could measure a product's speed, a color, size, flavor. So it has characteristics of the buyer or the product which needs to be measured and not the person or the product itself. These are the attributes which are required to be measured. Now when we talk about the attributes, there are 4 types of scales which are used in marketing research to measure the attitude towards a particular product or service. Now the first scale is of nominal scale. When we talk about nominal scale, here in this type the measurement of numbers, they are used to label the person or object or events. And the classification of identify objects, events or person is basically done on the basis of the letters of English alphabets. So using example mentioned, it could be referred to as labeling in a market research activity males as A and females as B. So there are only mathematical operations performed on nominally measured data is the count in each category. Now numbers are assigned to represent the categories, right? However, a care is to be taken that the classification should be done in such a way that groups are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Then comes ordinal scale. Now, a significant amount of consumer-oriented research, it to a great extent relies on the ordinal measurement. Here, numbers, letters or any other symbols which are used to rank the characteristics or the items. Now, ordinal scale basically tells whether an object has one or more or less of the characteristic than some other type of object or event. Now, the common mathematical operations like addition, subtractions, multiplication, divisions, they cannot be used with ranked data. However, statistical procedure based on interpretation of greater than or less than, they are permissible in case of ordinal scale. Now, ordinal scale measurement is of higher level than the nominal scale measurement. Because the ordinal scale data, they can be converted into nominal scale data, and thus the process and all the properties of the nominal scale data as well. Then comes interval scale. In interval scale responses, they have more powerful data as compared to ordinal scale responses. So they not only possesses the property of the ordinal and the nominal scale measurement, but also the strength of equality of the difference which there exists in the ranks. The last is the ratio scale. So ratio scale measurements, they are very powerful measurement tools, and they possess all the properties of the measurement scales which have already been discussed. Now, ratio of the numbers on these scales, they have meaningful interpretations. They possess a very unambiguous starting point. Now, the mathematical form of measurement is written by way of y equals to bx. When we talk about formats of rating scales, the rating scales, they take a lot of physical forms. So suppose the measurement of a bank A wants to assess the overall customer attitude towards the bank. So a number of alternative rating scales can be used. There are different formats, different types of formats that are used. The first is the graphic and the itemized format. Here what happens, they represent basically a graphic rating scale which present a continuum in the form of a straight line. So they are basically infinitely large number of rating which are possible. In this particular method, the assumption is that it enables the favorable and the respondent to detect the fine shades in the differences in attitude. Now, to measure how favorable the respondent has an attitude toward the bank, one needs to measure the physical distance from the left extreme to the position which is indicated by him in the question, or Higher the distance when we calculate, more is the favorable the respondent has an attitude towards the bank. Now there are certain disadvantages while using graphic rating scales. Firstly, the coding and analysis of data, it will not be difficult, but it requires a substantial amount of time. Second is the researcher or the respondent, he may not be capable of perceiving fine differences in the attitude. Then comes comparative and non-comparative. When we talk about this, the umbrella of comparative rating scale, it provides the respondent with a common frame of reference for answering the question. Now it assumes that the respondent, they are answering the same question with standard frame of references. There are others, however, non-comparative rating scales which permit the respondent to use or even no frame of reference while answering the question. Other is forced and non-forced response format. Now here what happens in forced and non-forced response format, the respondent is given the choice of not being in favor or against a particular thing. So he is given an opportunity to be neutral. Now here are such scales which are called as non-forced choice scales. He is being given an opportunity to be neutral to a particular questions. They have odd numbers of response categories. Now the advantage of using this is that the respondent wants to be neutral, and since he wants to be neutral, there is an option that he can exercise. Now a very problem with this method is that if the respondent, he has not made up his mind, or even if he is not sure about the answer, there is a tendency that he will take the middle category because of his lack of knowledge and his not knowing the answers. So there is an option where the respondent is forced to take a chance. So he has no option of remaining neutral. These are the types of scales which are referred to as forced choice scales. Another is balanced and unbalanced format. When we talk about balanced scale में equal number of positives or negatives होंगे. When we talk about positives, they are favorable responses and negatives are unfavorable responses. So when questions, they do not have equal number or they are not balanced of positives and negative responses, therefore it becomes biased, and this type of rating scale is referred to as unbalanced scale, where there is no equality between the positives and negatives ratings. So this scale in question is biased either towards the positive side or towards the negative side. So if the respondent, he did not have a favorable opinion about the bank, then he is not given an option to express his opinion because the rating scale is towards the positive side. Then comes constant sum rating scale. Now here what happens when the respondent is required to allocate points depending upon how favorable he feels towards a factor, that is referred to as constant sum rating scale. Then there is this method of paired comparison rating scale. Here comparison between various factors are done. Here bank is an example, and supposedly there are 5 banks. So choosing 2 banks at a time and the respondent here is forced to choose one alternative in each of the 10 cases listed there. So for example, the respondent has to choose between A and B, A and C, A and D. Since there are 5 bands which are classified as item, the number of paired comparison which are possible, they are 10. And to generalize, if there are n attributes of a product, then the maximum number of paired comparison would also become equal. Another is rank order scale. When we talk about rank order scale, here the data generated, they have an ordinal scale measurement. So the rank order technique is basically a comparative in nature, wherein the respondents, they are asked to rank comparatively which all are the items listed. Now using rank order scale, it has advantage because of its easiness to tabulate the result, because it is easy and very less time consuming to administer as compared to the paired comparison test. Again, paired comparison is also a comparative rating technique. Furthermore, it also forces the respondent to discriminate among the products in a very realistic manner. Yes, it has several limitations also. The data that is obtained, it could be misleading if all the alternatives which form respondent preferences are listed. So, if the respondents dislike all the attributes that are listed, the one ranked first is the least disliked attribute. The researcher therefore must ensure that a realistic set of objects are being evaluated and should be sensitive to the additional or attitudinal position of the respondent. Then comes single item versus multiple item scales. When we talk of single item, यहाँ पे क्या होता है? Only a single item is used to measure the opinions of the respondent, and only one rating scale is used. In case of multiple item scale, what happens? A number of statements are used which pertaining to attitudes towards an object. Now each statement, it contains a rating scale attached to it. The basic disadvantage of single rating scale is that it's very crude. It's in the very nascent stages of measuring the feelings or opinion of the respondent. Whereas this is not the case with the multiple item. There are various methods which are used for multiple item scale. First is Thurston equal appearing interval scale. So this scale of attitude measurement, it was basically constructed where a large number of statements pertaining to a subject of inquiry are collected. Now the statements, they range from one extreme of favorable attitude to other extreme of unfavorable attitude. Furthermore, each statement is written on a separate card and they are subject to the questions, these statements, on number of intervals, right? Then there is Likert scale. So Likert scale comprises of a series of evaluative statement items which are concerning an attitude object. Then third is semantic differential scale. Bipolar scale is also by name it is referred to as. So this is a scale that may be used in cases where comparison of brands or comparison of company images and to determine the effectiveness of advertising and attitude. Then last is the Fishbane scale, and it is a scale which uses a combination of constant sum and semantic differential scale. The last is the criteria for good measurement. Now the adequacy of the scale basically is judged in a way as to have the measurement of acceptable quality. Now they are discussed as validity. A scale is said to be valid if it measures correctly what it is expected to measure, that is its validity. Second is reliability. It is said to be reliable when it gives the same measurement under similar condition. And lastly, sensitivity. It is closely related to the reliability. So it is the ability of a scale to be able to discriminate between the respondents who differ even slightly in terms of their attitudes towards something. Two exercises that needs to be done. Explain the three criteria of measuring the usefulness of an attitude scale and distinguish between the following: forced and non-forced response formats, comparative and non-comparative formats, balanced and unbalanced formats. Thank you and have a nice day. Keep learning and relearning.